And we have returned to the second half of our second class on the important subject, Vedantically speaking, of Viveka, which our great leader in Vedanta in the world today, Swami Vivekananda, used for his name. Could have called himself different things, and he did in India. I think he started off, wanted to call himself after his teacher, Ramakrishnananda. And then, since one of his brother monks took that, he chose Satchidananda. And then when he came to the West, he was thinking Vivekananda. I think he had a sort of premonition about what the West needed, this kind of valuable tool of wheat and chaff separation, because it's so easy when you've taken teachings in a particular religion for centuries, even millennia, that all of a sudden you might forget that art of what's real and what isn't real. Or maybe even today think about what's important and what's not important. People are having problems with precedent of one thing over another, choosing what's the right way to go, and a lot of confusion over losing one's way. And even gaining it back through experience that's painful and not learning the lesson of that. So it's called procrastination and by other great words in English that we have to explain that, and compromising the ideal, and falling back to a second best position because we can't any longer see the truth. This can go on in terms of religion and science both, as we know, as well as psychology. So Svetasvatara Upanishad has a beautiful quote about that. They realized the self in India, the rishis realized the self, the truth, which is the self of philosophy, the God of religion, and the energy of science. They realized that one truth. And that was what we call nowadays Vedanta, or if we want an English word for it, spirituality, which is a word that's a little bit tainted because of metaphysics and in our early history, when Vivekananda was here seeing seances in living rooms in the name of spirituality, for spirits and so forth, or seeing big tent revivals to praise the spirit, so up in the skies or around him somewhere. So all of this was something that had to find a deeper location in us. And it's been some time in coming that we've had the Vedanta amongst us, and some of us, hundreds maybe, in America alone, if we're talking just the West here, have begun to yearn for something profound out of philosophy and something dear out of religion. It's been missing for so long, to the more sensitive souls anyway. But the more sensitive souls are the ones that never lost that discriminative power in the first place. They always knew the difference between, say, right and wrong. And Vedanta will, of course, say that there's a third way beyond right and wrong, or beyond good and bad, or pleasure and pain, or virtue and vice. So there's even a deeper kind of discrimination that has to go on after you set the dualities right. And the deluding pairs of opposites, Sri Krishna talks about it in the Gita. Dvandva mohena, moha means delusion. So those two have the mind set at odds with each other all the time, looking back and forth to good and bad, virtue, vice. And then even inside of those changing faces. Sometimes virtue takes on the look of vice, and vice takes on the look of virtue. In activity like, say, war and so forth, and what people are engaging in, and debate, and narrowness or universal mindedness. So you can find a place for Viveka everywhere, at every level, which is kind of what I'm trying to introduce to us in this 4-class series. And so we want to move on to how Viveka particularly reveals truth. so that you would use it to destroy all doubts about what truth is. So you wouldn't be going through this problem of, oh, he's got his truth, I've got mine, or there's this truth and that truth, and religions are proposing different truths. What they're proposing is different paths to truth. But the truth never changes, and we probably should all get together and settle on that. And then we would get down to the issues, the problems of settling on it. And that would take some deeper intelligence, which I'm going to use as a segue quickly into this other chart that I want to show you about essential facts in India, the 5 essential facts. And there's always these quintuplications that are important. But you see here, the word is pratibha, and Sri Ramakrishna used that and said that in response to Vivekananda himself, his young student, who was called Naren, or Narendra at that time, the Lord of Men, nicely named even back then in his childhood, that when he was asked to just describe the meaning of pratibha, it would be flint-like intelligence. And the metaphor Sri Ramakrishna used is that you could take a piece of flint, like the Neanderthals were into. That was called the age of the flint, because they discovered fire readily available in this matter, a material of earth. So that's been known for a long time. But again, and that was of course in Germanic races were Neanderthals. But in India, the whole thing about it was to use it as a metaphor that even when it's wet, it strikes sparks. So with that kind of sayings as far back as the Vairagya Stotram and other ancient scriptures, using nature, examples in nature to point towards truth, would be a kind of discrimination. So you saw Vashishta teaching with stories, and Lord Buddha taught with stories, Jesus taught with stories, Ramakrishna taught with stories, and metaphors and analogies were rife in those stories. So if you take a flint out of a river, Sri Ramakrishna said, and you know what it is, and you know what its capabilities and powers are, even wet, you strike it on a rock or granite or something and sparks will fly. And I think he had another saying that you can't do that with a match. See, a match has been in water even for a short time. You just mush it, even on a striker. But, and people would say, oh, gee, you're flint and I'm just a soggy match, so there's no chance for me, you see, gaining pratibha, you see. Yeah, belly aching. So basically, Sri Ramakrishna said, oh no, the thing is about a match that it's got sulfur in it. So just dry it out in the sun and then it'll strike again, like a flint. So you might say there's a gradation of souls there, of beings who are born with this sort of discrimination and can utilize it against you, like your gurus and so forth. And like Vivekananda did, although he was very gentle with people who weren't his students, but as soon as you became initiated by him, then he was very hard on you all of a sudden. People had to get used to that, because he was then there for your best good, and he was very serious about his responsibility for bringing you to samadhi, to a transcendental state, or freedom from rebirth, at least. That first desire Vashishta talked about. So every being then has the Atman in them, you might say, or has this pratibha in them. But to dry out the wetness in the match is worldliness, the water of worldliness. And the sun of knowledge is going to be the thing that's necessary and some time. So I have a chart coming up here as the 3 factors to the enlightenment of time that Holy Mother taught. Very beautiful. And we can probably look at that next week, but because that's how Viveka works in sadhana. So I've got how Viveka works in revealing itself as its own tool, how Viveka works to reveal the truth, how it works in sadhana, and how it works in freeing you from the ocean of samsara, or from the cycle of samsara, birth, life, death, and rebirth. To me, that's just almost the most important right now, because most people aren't going to what to speak of have an interest in truth, understand it when it's told them. They certainly didn't 2,000 years ago in Middle East. So, and it's been ongoing, this Maya, and very few souls have gotten enlightened, according to how many have been born and died. So, I mean, the subject becomes very important in this day and age to start planning ahead for your next lifetime. You're just planning ahead for this life. But that's not doing anything about your past karmas. And besides, you're planning ahead for this lifetime with a mind that's not got the right perspective, right? The very first thing that you need on the sort of discrimination, right, is this a well-informed view. If one of the greatest souls that ever lived, if not the greatest soul that ever lived on earth, according to Vivekananda's Lord Buddha, said that as his first thing, get a good, well-informed view, right orientation. Because everything else after that is karma-bound. A skewed perspective, you don't know the truth, you don't have the discrimination that knows the truth, you don't have the discrimination that leads to the knowledge that allows you to know the truth, you don't have you just go back in time to this place in time where your perspective got skewed. And you find out you weren't the only bozo on the bus. As they say, see, we're all bozos on this bus, was an expression back in the early times. It means a world full of fools, a pack of fools. That no one knows the right truth. To hope for help from friends, family, professionals provides no solution whatsoever in the end. Don't you know that all are lost here on earth? Everyone lives in pallid imitation of everyone else. So they just see something and it's monkey see, monkey do time. Whether it's a profession your father or grandfather is into, or whether it's going to war. Because that's what governments do, and that's what politicians like, and that's what the military is all about. But his view right away is no harm. Make sure you don't do any harm as you engage in life. To anyone, to anything. One of India's greatest systems, Buddha was an Indian rishi. Although the Nepalese would like to claim him for their own now, since the borders have shifted. But this was one of the greatest luminaries of all time, starting off with, make sure you have a right orientation before you even step foot in a spiritual path. It would be nice if you had the right orientation before you even got born. So here's my point, rebirth then. I'm planning ahead for my next lifetime, you see. A man walked up to another man, he said, what are you doing? I'm planning for a vacation. And he said, what are you doing? I'm planning ahead for my next lifetime. You see, one guy's packing his bags and he's going off to some faraway country to engage in some nonsense, some pleasures and some pain that comes in. The other person's going, sitting in the shrine and looking at all the garbage in his mind and taking a sword and destroying it. What do we do with all these problems? Somebody asked Vivekananda. He says, I want you to go, gather them all together, tie them into a bundle and throw them into the ocean. Right now. Then come and be my apostle. I'll show you the higher things. That stuff you should have gotten over a long time ago. You're carrying it from lifetime to lifetime, like a bundle. And you haven't unpacked it yet. If you unpacked it, you'd see all the horrible things in it. Attachments and weights, venomous insects, and various things you've been carrying around on your back, in your mind, the back of your mind, you see. On the back, in the back, whatever the case may be, of your mind, for lifetimes. And that's what makes people act the way they do, and not act the way they're supposed to do. So the difference between good and bad is like morality and ethics, isn't it? But once you get that decided, which is a which is an aspect I'm not even touching here in Vedanta. I mean, that should have already been done by people who have come to Vedanta or to any Eastern path that is worth its snuff, and most of them are. Then what you need to do is to take discrimination, take morality and ethics to the next notch, and scour the inside of your mind for things that are bothering you, and find this sword and cut them away adeptly, once and for all time, and live in peace. Peace of mind you need first and foremost. It's almost like right perspective, isn't it? What is the right orientation? Peace of mind. It's like Holy Mother's Four Noble Truth time, an Eightfold Path. And I'll show you that chart soon. I mean, and I've often said that practitioners of the middle path, you've got Sri Krishna, surprisingly you've got Lord Buddha, and then you've got Holy Mother, sort of like three great steps in India who are middle path practitioners. So, two of them were householders, you see. And you'd be hard put to call Buddha a monk, I think, when you looked at his life. So pratibha, this flint-like power of intelligence, living intelligence, Vivekananda said, is something that's owned by few people. Like I say, intelligence has kind of gone missing if it was ever there in the first place in our culture in this day and time. Not that living intelligence, you can't find it. When you do, like we found it in Lexington, you were shocked. You see. Like an elephant walking through a village. You're used to seeing mongooses and cats and dogs. But an elephant comes through, and as a person with real living intelligence comes to the little village of your world and causes this huge tremor, sensation. That's a good thing. See, that's a good change. If we have to take change to task, then let's use our discrimination to look for powerful, positive changes. Something that leads us somewhere, not something that throws us back on the old, threadbare ways of acting and thinking. So, for instance, this first quote, everything, the world, manifestations therein, enjoying, suffering, departing, the power of conjuring up realms of name and form, all of these can and should be directly designated and attributed to one's own intelligence. That is, i.e., not to nature, not to chance, not to luck, not to good fortune, and not to God. We'll get to that. These are all your own intelligence. Your self is imbued with intelligence, with a capital I. Your mind is imbued with intellect. There's a discriminating move for you. An intellect is run by the ego, and it collects certain facts that you haven't even checked out yet, that you say are yours, and they form your opinions. But you haven't gone to the higher opinion, you haven't gone to the higher court of appeal yet, and sat in front of Lord Brahma and say, what's the truth? Or gone to the sun god like Samkriti and asked, what's the power of light? Or gone to a Vivekananda or a Ramakrishna and asked him, what is pratibha in Sanskrit? What does that mean? Other factors such as fate, destiny, karma, even grace also reside within and spring from that self-same power. And it comes right down to it, you'll find that you'll grant yourself your own illumination at some time. I think I'm ready now, I'm worthy. So you'll ask the Guru, can you give it to me? No, but I think you're ready to give it to yourself. Because the self is in all. The self is all in all, none else exists, and thou art that. Boom, you see. Tat tvamasi, thou art that. And at the right time, because of right perspective, and because of all the practices that you followed to get to this gold mine of living intelligence inside of you, and then all of a sudden you just put the intellect aside for that. You put the ego aside for the ripe ego. And you put all transformations aside for the changeless reality. And then no more wooden nickels for you. And no more birth in the womb of matter for me, only emanation from my Divine Mother. And that's where discrimination is telling and most powerful. I ascribe and liken truth to the most corrosive substance in the universe, in all the worlds. So that's where truth becomes truth, and there's nobody to argue there about it. They're still all back yapping like the mynahs in the tree at dusk behind me. I've got a tree back here in the field, you see. And about 5:30 you can just see them all flying over the house, heading for that tree. Hundreds of mynah birds. And then they get into a caucus back there. See, it's a philosophical debate, and they're all talking at the same time. It's a ruckus, you see. So I always go back there and just look out on the deck and laugh at them. It's just so funny. They're each trying to compete for being the voice that knows, the most important voice. All these little mynah egos back there. Mynah egos. But the major ego has to stand forth, the mature self, and proclaim itself to be supreme, to know itself to be supreme. So pratibha would be the solution to everything that's the opposite of it. So, for instance, in this nice image I found, that is pratibhasika satta. So that means apparent dream reality. This is what everyone's engaging in, dream. So their lifetimes are dreams. I'm doing this as a kind of preliminary chart that's getting us into this section on truth and dreaming. The truth is that Brahman never dreams, quote unquote. Vivekananda said, Atman never dreams. Atman never comes and goes, never thinks, always knows. It's the intellect that's thinking. So let's make it as the highest thinker that it can be, see, and not just join a pack of fools on a tree somewhere, cawing at sundown, and afraid at night, silenced as soon as darkness happens. Aren't you still debating? Fools of a feather flock together. So pratibhasika satta is unreal or apparent dream reality. And there you see the circle around the elephant because he's caught in this. See? And when he's caught in it, it's because of pratibandhika bhava, the power of, pratibandhika, power of obstruction. See? So he was having a good time sipping water and showering itself. There's actually a story about that in Lord Vashishta, about the ego is like an elephant that's spraying water over everything. Not just itself, but everyone else. So, not having such a good time now as he bleeds into the water, because this crocodile got a hold of this baby elephant's leg. But he prays, he makes an offering, you see, to the Lord, which is pratibha itself, his own self-aware intelligence. Everyone will be forced to return to that. I think even at the time of death, if you don't go completely blank or see hells, because of the evil actions you were engaged in, whatever it is your mind conjures up that are the just fruits you have coming to you by your own actions, Shankara says, then basically you can form another dream reality and live in heaven, or you'll see the demons, as the Tibetans say. There's wrathful deities come at you, you see, and are you ready to handle them yet? They take out some flint and a sword of discrimination, and you're well armed, you see. Strike some light inside of yourself. So basically, this is Garuda with Vishnu on it, coming out of the sky. That's the self-aware intelligence, coming out of the sky of your own pure intelligence. And bringing with it this chakra, I think isn't it on there? Yeah, the chakra, and casting it at the problem. pratibandhika, the power of intelligence which destroys or removes all obstructions. So these are 4 words of about 6 or 7 in the Sanskrit dictionaries that start with the word pratibha. And so it was easy when I saw this image, think Sanskrit, think the dictionary, put them out there and make them into a teaching on what you get or what you're seeking if you're a sincere aspirant in terms of gaining back your lost discrimination between the real and the unreal. Going beyond that duality once and for all. Speaking of Lord Buddha, let's hear what he says about this self-same thing. Gods and goddesses, father and mother, or any other kith or kin cannot confer greater benefit than that of the well-directed intelligence. This intelligence is incomprehensible and exceedingly subtle. It wanders wherever and whenever it desires. Therefore, the wise ones carefully watch over this intelligence, which resides in the cavern of the heart, and utilize it to free themselves and others from the shackles of Mara. And right out of the Dhammapada, those are 2 sutras. So you could see why right orientation here can morph into the result of it, and how a soul like that could, like just singing about Shankar, I have no birth, no death, I have no father, no mother. Saying the same thing here, gods, goddesses, mothers, fathers, and so forth. You make a pronouncement like that, you can see why they'd call you an atheist, or wrongly infer that you don't have faith in God, and so forth. But what about if pure intelligence is your God? I mean, they came at Vivekananda about that, some of the Buddhists. They said, well, first of all, you've got it all wrong. It's intelligence is the first compound of Brahman, not will. You're saying that will is the first compound. That comes later. Pure intelligence comes as the first compound of consciousness. First there's consciousness, then there's intelligence shining off it. And so they were rather stunned to hear this from an authority. Authority means a realized soul, not somebody who's got a degree in India. Today you just put PhD after your name, everyone's running after you and thinking you're telling the truth. But you don't put sannyasin after your name or ananda at the end of your name if you don't already know what you're talking about spiritually, where it counts. See? This will strike you, this sword will strike you where it hurts the most, where it counts. So father, mother, kith or kin, any other set of dualities or external beings, no help for them usually. True spiritual seekers are like islands in a big ocean. And they can't find company. Very hard to find company, what to speak of gather it together and benefit from it. It's called Sangha. And even Sangha turns into Asanga later, like it did for Lord Buddha and others, and wander away, see. I love you all very much. As soon as you're out of here, I won't think of you. One Swami told us in India. Took care of us all day, led us out the back gate. I want you to know that I love you very much and I think about you, but once you're out of sight, out of mind, and you're out of here, I won't ever think about you again. Because that's variance, that's multiplicity, that's hope, and that's the denial of karma in individuals. There's only one Atman, and I want to keep my mind on that. And that'll be the best for you if I do. And the best for families and fathers and mothers and children and ancestors. That's why you part company with them, because you've seen that that's the highest help you can give them. Advaita even sings about that. When he sings, Matabita de tanayadi nameka de chit jatamritam nachamano nachame nirvyakulam stiramidam paramartha samarasam gaganopamoham You can tell right away that it's rather like Shankara's na mrityur na shanka na mata na pita matadi pitadi tanayadi nache kadachit. So he sings in his own way. I have neither fathers, mothers, nor children, because birth, death, and desire have all been extinguished in my mind. The ever-abiding state of utter calm has replaced it and has come over me. It is unshakable, supremely tranquil. Thus, I conclude that I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So we can only use things in nature, as I was saying earlier, to explain the best things in nature, to explain this state of mind, if it can be called a state, that has come over him. It's like come over him unbeknownst, just out of nowhere, as it were, like grace descends. And that grace is, as was said by Shankar in the sort of discrimination chart, it's just this pure intelligence. Second compound, after consciousness, the first compound of consciousness. If you come upon it, then it's like you saw the rays, now you see the sun, you see the connection, and thou art that. And the differences between light, its shining, and the one who receives the rays is erased. It doesn't exist anymore. And you can't just do that sunbathing. The sun's warming me. You see, that kind of oneness is just fleeting. Because night will come, rain will come, and snow will come, various things. So you have to experience this inside as the light of consciousness. Chit Jyoti. Nice word. Chit, like your thoughts, your highest thoughts, blissful, and Jyoti, light. So that we make some headway, and we looked at that. Let's look at these 5 essential facts. Would be a good place to end, if we can make it there, before we have the 3rd class next week at Kedarnath, where we'll have a new member with us. Our group still hasn't swelled beyond the COVID limitation numbers, so we're all good. And observing the rules they want, but then, as is the predilection of the sincere practitioner, keeping our minds on the highest things, even in our daily life, if we learn that art. So we look at this once, twice a year, because this follows a combination, I've often said, of probably Samkhya, Yoga, and Vedanta, and Advaita. It's kind of a 5-fold amalgam of essential facts that you'd probably want to hear if you were interested in non-duality, for instance. And maybe also, as you're interested in non-duality and trying to merge the hailstone of your mind and intellect into the ocean of Brahman, that there are certain subtle obstacles still in the way that are philosophical. Bhranti Darshana, there's some unclarity still at that very high level, like the third eye or Agya chakra still has disorientation there when the consciousness arrives there. It's trying to get used to seeing through one eye, see, instead of two. There's still some leftover residue from its old thoughts, its own existence, and they're going away like clouds in the sky. So you want the open sky, blue open sky of awareness, as Tibetan Buddhists talk about it. So 5 eternal and essential facts of non-dual Indian philosophy are these. First, the quote, in the process of neutralizing karmas and samskaras, which is what I was just mentioning, the recognition of the distinction between soul and the mind-matter conglomerate occurs. Cited as the difference between Purusha and Prakriti in Sankhya, spirit and nature. This key insight is not to be relegated to the perspective of duality. That is, you don't take it on and study it with a mind that's still frozen in the dual view. Instead, it's to be taught in the light of Advaitic practice and realization. So it would be like having the muscles to heft that sword before you use it, because you might cause some havoc with it, cut away things that are still not ready to be cut away, or use it against others in an unwise way. So this qualification of the hearing about the truths of Advaita, non-duality, well posited in the mind over time and checked against those sources that they speak about, like Illumined Guru and the proof of the revealed scriptures. Discrimination involved in all that. Viveka, Aviveka Guru, as Vishishta gave that teaching out. You want a teacher who knows the truth and teaches the truth, not a teacher who still is involved in duality and fundamentalism and trying to make everything all right with the world when there's nothing right in Maya. Not ultimately. As compared to Viveka and Aviveka in all these other ways that we're looking at it too. So the first truth then that we're taking in the light of non-duality is the soul, which called Atman in Sanskrit, is different from and ever free of nature. So if there's an allowance made for any kind of twoism, that's it right there. And that's not only allowable, it's necessary. You do away with the unreal. And you don't come up with some premature statement or announcement that, well, that's not non-duality. We have to include everything in non-duality, even Maya. But non-dual truth doesn't contain anything of a different nature, of a separate nature. It's only itself, and it cancels out everything else. And the realizer of the Atman, or of Buddha nature, however you want to call that, because like I sang about Vivekananda, the Buddhist came at him and said, well, what are you talking about, Atman and self and all this? And he said, well, intelligence, of course. And he said, that's what Buddha called it. Pragyaparam was Buddha's name for God. Said Vivekananda, Pragyaparam, supreme intelligence, and he named himself after it. So he didn't have to talk about it or try and convince you of it. See, he was it. There's anything you have to know about me, he said at the end of his life, but no matter what they're saying about me, is that I'm awakened intelligence. I awoke. My ignorance is gone, utterly gone. And so he didn't have to prove that or invent a philosophy around it. He had compassion for suffering, so he told us about right perspective and nonviolence, which have always been there in Dharma. So that's the one separation you're allowed to make and probably are encouraged to make. Separate out the wheat from the chaff, otherwise it wouldn't be necessary in this world. And it might not be necessary in higher worlds, where the light is shining, obviously. In the world of fish, they're still debating about whether water exists. See? They get together in schools, and they talk about that. You see, philosophical schools of fish. Oh, my great-grandfather fish, he said that water existed. He was a wise old fish, and he really tried to convince us water existence. And others are saying, no, it doesn't exist. What's the matter with you? See? So that clarity you need, that the sort of discrimination gives you, that gives you the knowledge of truth, which opens the third eye, and the flint-like intelligences, the living intelligence, the fire of yoga is all burning there eternally, like an eternal flame, like the word Om. That's where they camp out. That's the center they go to after they pass from the body. And then, as we will find out from our rebirth cycle, how Viveka should be used to be born, to choose parents, to live, to pass consciously, and then take another rebirth or not, as according to your choice. That's where we'll go with that. So right now you're about seeing what I like to call the difference between the sentient and the insentient. And all manner of misfiances and fantasies and what Vivekananda called superstitions in the world and in religion are done away with when you label Maya insentient. And you label yourself sentient, intelligent. You find out that everything that came from you as projection is insentient, because thoughts can't live. They're just projections. They turn into objects that aren't living, that aren't real. They're empty. And that's where we'll go next week when we look at the meaning of emptiness. You see, how objects are really meaning according to everyone from Lord Copula to Buddha. The second law, so we can get through these today, is that on the upper right-hand corner, all of nature has come out of the soul, and as it does, no change takes place in the soul. The soul, of course, here is foundational Atman underneath everything, the ground of existence, as Meister Eckhart said, but the soul that projects it is the mind, complex. It's got a lot to it. That's your second body, your subtle body, that you should probably, as my recent God blog on the website says, I'm not the body, but I have 3 of them. You see. So you can own up to owning 3 bodies, but you're just not any of them. You're neither the outer body, the inner body, or the causal body, as the words we have to borrow in English. The immanent and the transcendent, see, the immanent, the subtle, and the transcendent, stula, sukshma, and karana, the karana being the cause of the other 2. So you come out of a causal state with seeds, and those seeds water them and form dreams, and then the dreams you get into wombs where you can enjoy these seeds as manifested objects. And those are 3' hypnotizers in the process. And if you don't identify with them, then you're playing and sporting. If you do, then you're bound, basically how to say it. So you could see, and you need, when we say we're taking this chart in the Advaitic perspective, then when we read you the second, you have to connect it to the first. You can't forget the first and then go to the second and leave it unconnected. That's what you did when you came out of causal to subtle to gross, or what you came out of M to U to A. That's Om spelled backwards. That forgetfulness got in the way. And when you got here, they didn't help you remember. They just learn that trade, make that money. You see, learn that trade, go to school, make that money, covet objects, and lose your memory. The loss of the memory is the unfortunate part. It means memory of your past lifetimes. Because you have to pretend to learn everything all over again that you already know. How many times do you want to do that? Sit at a desk, eating lead off your pencil and sipping glue while your teachers talk about nonsense in the world of change. How many times do you want to do that? So connect it. The soul, Atman, is different from, ever free from nature, yet all of nature has come out of the soul. And as it comes out, no change takes place in the soul. So that's where you begin to fall into grief. Is that change happens, Atlas shrugged, but Atman never did. But you believe in Atlas shrugged, and all the changes become real to you. And you take them as real, and so does the society and the religion you're in. And all of life is based upon that. And you never go running to the non-dual seers to find the truth. They can't seem to find their way to you either. That's called being thick as a brick. Got the consciousness of a dead bush. And you're thick as a brick, they say. So the truth can't get to you. So I say, some people are far gone. You could be Jesus again, come again, and they wouldn't believe you. I love you, but I don't believe you. Is that possible? The third law here is, as nature emerges from the soul, it does so as mental projection, not as creation. So, pardon me here while I replace a few words in your thick as a brick vocabulary. Make some changes here, because words are important, and ideas, to convey ideas which are born of pratibha, and have the right vibration to them, therefore give you the right orientation, so that this sort of discrimination becomes a valued asset to your spiritual life, and not something mentioned in the scripture that's 1400 years old, that you'll never come upon. See? So basically, we're replacing the word creation with projection. Srishti stiti lai, Kamalakata saying, in this Srishti, creation, stiti, preservation, laya, dissolution, in this threefold process people get lost. It's a tempest in a teacup. The stationary mind, the stationary self and the transmigratory mind. Read that God blog on our site. The stationary self and the transmigratory mind. There's the sort of discriminations cutting that for you. Difference between soul and matter, God and mammon, Purusha and Prakriti, Brahman and Maya. So when you hear that one, make sure you hear it in the context of the other two. So this is all a line. Let's see, 5 essential facts that will clear you from misconceptions. These superstitions of religion that Vivekananda desperately wanted to get rid of in the Western mind. It wasn't so hard to do that in the Indian mind, because they'd been steeped in it. Their forgetfulness was a few centuries old, you see. But we haven't even lived a few centuries here. And we started out on the wrong footing. It was agreed about a bunch of tea sitting in a harbor in Boston, the right orientation to start with, was coming and taking away the lands of the Indians. Was that right orientation to begin with? Don't get us started, as you say. So let's do a favor to everyone, see, and think about everything as a projection from the mind, because at least then we can see that the karma and the suffering that comes from it isn't real. Otherwise it is. It seems very real to you and you carry it for lifetimes. If you don't take this perspective, then you carry that weight for lifetime after lifetime. You believe in it, The world is real. It's the only reality. I'm the body. I don't have three bodies, which would be just a beginning to understanding the truth if you counted the other two bodies in with the first. That would at least take you inward, not outward to births in many wombs over time on the physical planet alone. 4 is the soul, Atman, has an eternal relationship with nature. Here's a concession. If it identifies with nature, there is suffering, but if it only associates with nature, it can sport freely. So this is where you find a little bit of Tantra coming into the mix of Samkhya and Advaita, because the principle of sport was well played by some souls. And you'd have to be a very staunch and deep non-dualist to exit out of the equation. I find that's more like a thing about moods rather than truth. Sometimes sport doesn't appeal to me whatsoever. Just want the truth alone. And let's do away with this idea of sport. Why does the soul want to sport? What does it need to sport for when everything's in the soul? It's got everything. It just needs to be able to go back and connect with it. If it associates with that and sports outwardly with it, then it's free of risk. But if it identifies with it, game's over. Or maybe the game's just beginning. See, the game's just afoot. Because Sherlock, had a good discrimination going when he was snooping out crime. It sort of has to be the same way. It's the spiritual Sherlock Holmes sniffing out the crime that Maya perpetrates on you, and that you buy into and perpetrate upon yourself and others thereafter. Like parents to children, not teaching them the Dharma. I was talking to someone just this morning who is Hindu. Well, we never had Dharma in our country when I was raised. I never heard the word. Never heard anything that was a Dharmic teaching in my life as I grew up. Not a shred, not a wisp, not a scent of it. See? And in some ways, that might be okay as a start. It's called lack of indoctrination. Whereas you might have had other families around you in your neighborhood who are getting fundamentalism crammed down their throats. And you didn't have to suffer that, you see. But you did have to later on find out, how to get free of suffering. It's a consideration in everyone. Why does the soul have to suffer? Why does it suffer? And people ask the question who even aren't very deep into philosophy, just because they don't like the experience. It might be what drives them on towards going deeper into a path or finding a guru later and so forth. But there's a lot of ways to go afoul of the path, get off the path. So again, discrimination is the one thing that you can hold on to that will keep you straight and true to the path, to the end. The end being a conscious death in this tradition. So that's a good distinction there in the fourth essential truth. Association as compared to identification. Identification should be with Brahman, not with nature. Association should be with your Atman. The fifth here is nature has manifested and unmanifested sides, by which knowing the soul can remain free of cycles of birth and death and ignorance. And here's where non-dual truth begins to smack of the higher teachings of Dharma, which will then go into the medium levels of Dharma and then to the early teachings of Dharma, to the novitiate, when they first heard about something beyond morality. Hopefully they had that. So this begins to show us that even the insentient side of things that we're looking at has a lot more to consider that we're not considering, that would be keys to opening up doors to intelligence. And we're talking about nature, external only, black holes and, universes and stargazing and suns exploding, and it's all outside, but then there's no tracing to the source of all those things that are in unmanifested side of nature. So the unmanifested side of nature, unmanifested prakriti they call it, deserves a good, deep, long look by any soul who wants to make the final determinative cut with that sort of discrimination and separate the real from the unreal. Burn the chaff and eat the wheat. Up the middle you see Nataraj dancing his dance of the Naumanan. I meditate on that sometimes. It's a beautiful phrase known for Nataraj and Mother Kali, dance the dance of the Naumanan. It's not the dance of the phenomenon. That's Atlas Shrugged. It's the dance of the Naumanan, that nothing ever happens. Brahman's actionless. And you are too. And you need to be still for a long time to remember that, so that you can realize it. Stationary, Atman, the transmigratory mind. So up the middle of that beautiful dance, he's standing on the demon of the world, or worldliness, and holding the burning fire, and shaking the damaru as he dances, his hair like cosmic prana going out behind him, and his leg is up so he can touch his feet, and he's pointing to it, take refuge here. So beautiful symbologies in the world of images. And there up the middle are the designations for that. The world, its negativities, taking refuge at his feet, the grace that follows, the love in his heart, and the wisdom at the crown chakra that he sports. Or doesn't sport, as the case may be, in form and formlessness. So I want to read them straight. Just close your eyes and listen. The soul, Atman, is different from and ever free from nature. All of nature has come out of the soul, and as it does so, no change takes place in the soul. As nature emerges from the soul, it does so as mental projection, rather than as actual creation. The soul, Atman, has an eternal relationship with nature, but if it identifies with nature, there is suffering. Only if it associates with nature can it sport freely. Nature has manifested and unmanifested sides as well, by which knowing the soul can remain free of cycles of birth and death and ignorance. A good fivefold teaching to memorize and say to someone in the next quotidian or commonplace conversation at dinner, oh, did you know that the soul Atman is different from, ever free of nature? All of nature comes out of you, but as it does so, no change takes place. And just watch the tongue stop flapping. The minds go numb. And if you're talking to somebody who has the Dharma, then watch the eyes roll up in their head, or their eyes close, as the case may be. So this isn't too much to memorize, and it's in English. But if you look at the overall teachings of India, all the different darshanas, and you can quintessentialize them down to these 5 things for the highest good of yourself, that is your mind, and then for others, that you can spread not just facts or information or my truth opposed to your truth, or even just Dharma, but actually truth itself, in no uncertain terms, in the English language, that people can contemplate on and meditate on for illumination, without having to doubt what you're saying. Comes from the testament of saints, seers, sages, luminaries. And if you want to study it, I can direct you to those beings and their sources, so that you can fill out your knowledge or do some manana, some meditation on it. The final quote there at the end then is, when the mind recognizes the stark distinction between consciousness and matter, sentiency and insentiency, it perceives that all of nature, name, form, time, space, and causation, is its own self-projected maya, and it attains what Patanjali calls kaivalya. Kaivalya is a Sanskrit word whose best English equivalent is isolation. Isolation from nature, which is the name, form, time, space, karma forming machine. That if the mind falls into it without the right perspective and without a sword to cut its way out, gives rise to lifetimes of birth and death and ignorance. Which is how we started the very first quote. People begin to think that it's real, because they experience it again and again without knowing any better, lifetime to lifetime. Nobody ever comes along and tells them. They don't know, they don't see. Are you one of them? As one of the pop songs in the 70s said. A quick study really, but very in-depth and powerful and good for contemplation, so that you sharpen that sword of discrimination once you have it, and you can wield it in a more effective fashion amongst different souls who have lost their way. There's a fog upon LA. My friends have lost their way. We'll be over soon, they said, but they've lost themselves instead. Another song out of the 60s. So a great fog has come out of the mind, over the mind, called Maya. And beings were headed for you to share in the Dharma, but they lost themselves instead along the way. And you're just waiting for them to disperse that fog of ignorance with the sword of discrimination, with the great wind of Mahavayu. Sri Ramakrishna said, from midnight to 4 in the morning, a great wind is blowing called the Mahavayu. And that's like another word for Om, the word. And he said, the avenues to it are open, especially at that time, between midnight and 4. And the yogis follow those avenues inside, in rapt contemplation to the destination there, and they drink deep of that peace, and then they come back out and try and explain it to people. So, Viveka as its own tool, and Viveka as it represents or reveals truth to us, is what we've been covering these first 2 classes. Next week we'll look at that very important one of how it works inside of birth, life, death, and rebirth, which I'm saying more and more to me is the more important thing to focus on. It's good to know the truth, of course, first and foremost, but in a time and a land where, and an age where people are not prone to waking up just by hearing. It's said, even by luminaries. Then it'd be good to show them how they can use discrimination to better themselves in increments. Plan for your next lifetime, not for a vacation in this lifetime. Here we will end then with a chant. Om Tachnayo, Om Tachnayo, Ravrini Mahe, Gatung Yagyaya, Gatung Yenupataye, Daivi Swastarastu Naha, Swastir Manusebyaha, Urdhvam Jigatu Bhesajam, Sangno Astu Dvipade, Sangchachushpate, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we make a great offering of the small self into the great self via discrimination. May we always revere the Lord and Mother of all sacrifices. May divine blessings be upon us. May peace be unto the entire human race. May healing, well-being, and prosperity then also come among us. Oh, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.